So first, I'd like to thank the organizer for the invitation. So my talk is moved to the big data. So we call it big data medicine. So we want to identify the early warning signal for the diseases by using, we call it a dynamic network biomarker. So talk about the diseases. As you know, once a disease occurs, it's very difficult to reverse, say, to make the disease return to the normal state. So for that reason, in China, we have a very famous the book, which is called Yellow Emperor Medicine. So it was written 221 BC. So it's 2,000 years ago. So we have at that era, they already recognize this phenomenon. So they have in that book, they called the best doctor treats the unoccurring disease. So the better doctor treats occurring disease. So the inferior doctor treats the occurring disease. So, which means, most of our current medical doctor, are considered as a lower level based on this standard. Okay, so we really want to use the system biology to do some better doctor or maybe best doctor. So that is come to my talk. So we want to diagnose the we call it the unoccurring disease. So this concept certainly is very good, but it's only qualitative concept. So we really want to quantify this criteria to put this to the clinical applications. So this is a hypothesis for this work. So we consider, we are in a normal state. Our body, our biological system, with the environmental, external, and say internal parameter change. So the system is slowly, gradually changed. At a certain point, which they have a drastic change, then lead to the we call the disease state. So this is the hypothesis. In terms of the phenotype, the normal state and the disease state, they have a very big difference. That's why we can identify some biomarker to make the diagnosis. You can find many proteins, genes. They have quite different, differential expressions. So you can use them as biomarkers. And so, hot topic is the early diagnosis. They want to find as far they have they have some change at molecular level, even there is no change in the phenotype. So you want to identify. So this is a very hot topic. Even it's difficult, but still they have some way because they really have some change. So here we are not interested for this part. Certainly we are not interested for this part. So we really want to identify here. We call the pre-disease state, which is the still normal state. It's one part of normal state, but we know with the same condition, they eventually, they were quickly to move to the disease state. So here is but at this point, this state is very difficult to identify. The reason is, because it's still one part of normal state. There is no big difference from, in terms of the proteins, genes, the concentrations. So that's why traditional biomarker usually failed to identify this part, this state. But it's very important. The reason is that it's still, for many cases, it's still reversible. So with appropriate medical treatment, you still can make this state return to the very robust normal state. But if you came to the disease state, like the cancer and the diabetes, what you expect is just to keep the current status, not further progress. The foundations here, for this work is based on the bifurcation. We just model a nonlinear system they have is a high-dimensional system. Then they slowly change it at a certain point. They break down. So we want to identify their bifurcation point. So here is I passed this part. So the question is before I show some mathematical say the model, we want to show our major questions. So we really want to answer this question. If we really can identify the we call the pre-disease state. But with the conditions that we want to use a small number of samples. The reason is if you use to the clinical application, the people with, pre-disease people is still normal people. You cannot expect such people came to the hospital for physical check every day. So you have to take a very small number of the sample to make a decision. So that is a constraint for this work. The requirement is, measurement is that we want to, if you only measure, small numbers sample like the glucose level, some, blood pressures, certainly we cannot identify the critical point. The reason is not sufficient information to make such decisions. So we require large amount of the observation for one samples. So some like the omics data, we want to say for one sample to measure over 1,000, or even millions of the data like the sequencing. So for this work, we expect 3 samples, at least 3 samples. We can make a decision to tell you if or not right now in a critical state. As I mentioned, this is a big data related work. We really, what we can collect is really high dimensional data, but it's very unreliable. So such data is really different from a traditional, general big data, like the Google or Amazon. They collect so large amount of the, big data. So that's the data we call big small data. The reason is they have a very large samples but each individual is very low dimensions. But for biomedical data, big data is the feature is different. It's very different. We call the small big data. The reason is for each individuals, you have a very small number of samples, but with very high dimensions. If you measure, say, like the sequence, you can have 500 gigabyte for one samples. Even gene expressions, you have 20,000, gene expression data to one samples. So the challenges for medical big data is how do you can extract the information from this small sample with a very high dimension. Okay. So I talk a little bit of mathematical model for, mathematical manipulation for this work. As mentioned, we consider high dimensional nonlinear system. So how the Z is we use the Z represent whole state variables. They may be very high dimensional, and any unknown, slow change the variable we consider as parameter is unknown. So the process is we want to, as mentioned, the hypothesis is we consider the system is moved from normal state, then came to the pre-disease state, critical point, then eventually lead to the disease state. So, and as mentioned, the pre-disease state we consider as the critical state, right? So at this state, as far we take the limit of the normal state, we can get the very clear mathematical conclusions. We know the system, even is high dimensional, as far as they approach the critical state, they constrain to we call the center manifold. So this work we have to make 2 different manipulations for this model. We first want to transfer this high dimensional system to the center manifold, then get we call the statistical rule on the center manifold, then transfer this rule to the observable space, because what we can get is that we observe the high dimensional data. So the first part is we need to transfer. As mentioned, we we started from a stable state. So we just do some linear transformation to transform the high dimensional space to from X, as mentioned, is observable space like the gene expressions, then to the abstract space, phase space. Okay. Then from here, we conduct a co-dimension 1 bifurcation analysis. So then we get hold the covariance and also correlation conclusions for this phase space. Okay. And then from this conclusion, we further return to the phase space to the observable space. We use the same equations. Then we do the same statistical analysis. So eventually, pass the whole the detailed mathematical analysis. Then eventually we get these conclusions. This is the phase space. This is the observable space. So this is the covariance for each variable. This is the PCC, Pearson correlation coefficient. So for the observable space, we can get the same set of the equations. Then from here, then we get the conclusions. So for this high-dimensional system, we can prove as far a system came to the critical stage, they satisfy these 3 conditions. So these 3 conditions actually is very simple. We only use the Pearson correlation and standard deviations. So we can show as far system came to the critical state, then they satisfy these conditions. So if this variable reduced to the one-dimensional system is simply reduced to the critical slowing down result. So I use this slide to show what's these 3 conditions. So this is the hypothesis. As I mentioned, we consider system is moved from a normal state, then critical state, then a disease state, right? So this is the disease progression. So at normal state, suppose we get the 5 samples to measure these people, 5 samples. Then we can get the correlation if we suppose we measure the gene expressions for 20,000 genes. So we can get the 20,000 times 20,000 correlations, right? So we have a very big network here. But when the system came to the pre-disease state, we found a very strange phenomena. The one is we found a small number of the genes, their correlation drastically increased. So that's the condition 1. So condition 2 is originally this small number of the genes, they collaborate with other genes to facilitate the biological functions. But at the critical stage, you will find this small number of genes, they lost the correlation with the remaining 20,000 genes. So this is the condition 2. They lost the whole correlation with the remaining variables. So third condition is that we can show this group, small number of the variables, they have very high fluctuations. Hold the remaining 20,000 variable because it's still normal state. It's similar. This state is similar with this state. So hold the 20,000 variable is similar. Only this small number variable, they have very high fluctuations. So this is the condition 3. So we can show as far as these 3 conditions are satisfied, the system came to the critical stage. Okay. So we call this number of this group of the genes, we call the dynamic network biomarker. Because it's, as mentioned, we also can show this group number of the variable, they make the first move to break the limit to drive the whole system from this state to the disease state. So, which means if you use the drug to, treat this number of the variables, theoretically, this state cannot move to the disease state. So we consider it's a very good drug marker. At least not at this moment. They may, in the future, maybe move to other, part, but not here. So this is basically our theoretical result for the high-dimensional system, use the big data. Here, okay, so the other one I also want to say, we have a DNA. DNA we consider is a static feature. Certainly, they have a mutation with the, the progression of the disease, but basically, it's a static feature. Use the DNA. Use the SNP. You can predict the risk. You can have the, risk prediction for the diseases, but it still is kind of a possibility, not the, but our DNB we consider is the dynamic features because it can tell you right now what kind of state right now these people is. So, so we really want to move to the DNA to the DNB. Okay. So in the morning session, many speakers talked of general early warning signals. The one is we call it the herding behavior. It's widely used in the financial area. Also for the network science, they use the connective avalanche. And also for the physics, if you consider the one-dimensional system is a critical slowing down phenomenon, right? So but here we can consider is one part of our theory. So here, the biggest feature is the local collective fluctuations, okay, as for the high-dimensional network. So we consider it should be used for other area. Before I move to the clinical applications, I also want to show, the current medical research, people use the GWAS. They really want to use a statistical, theory. Statistical computing algorithm to identify the efficient biomarker. So what they can do is collect a large number of the samples, from a normal state and a disease state. You collect a large number of samples, found the, significant differential genes or proteins to make the diagnosis. So it certainly, it works. They can identify many efficient biomarkers. But for this state, critical state, if it's usually, they may not big different from normal state, as mentioned earlier. So even I want to make a point is that even you collect large number of the samples, you still cannot find the significant difference from the normal state to the pre-disease state. So that's why we need a dynamic theory. Okay, but if you check each individual's samples, you will find very big difference. In terms of average value, there's no difference, but in terms of fluctuations, you found. This is for one-dimensional system. It's look at very simple, but for the high-dimensional system, we need to use the DNB to the. So this is the quantified. How to quantify the DNB is we just use these three conditions. So I just passed off the detail. If you're interested, you just check our publications. So we use the three, as mentioned, we have three conditions. We use these three conditions to quantify the DNB. To quantify, the DNB, at least we need three samples. Certainly, if you want to statistical significant result, we need at least 5 samples of 1 people. The algorithm is to check the 3 conditions. The first is the deviation test and the correlation test, and another significant correlation test. So from these 3 tests, you can identify the DNB. So we call it the group. Okay, so I passed this one. Then I move to the, we used a few examples to show how we can identify this, we call the pre-disease state. The first example is lung injury. We use the animal model. This is used the animal model. Okay, so it's this is a poison gas. This gas, is usually released from a car. So use this gas. What is the mass exposure to this gas? They measure at a 0 time point, half hour, 1 hour, until 72 hours. So they want to, measure 22,000 RNA, gene expressions. So each time point sacrifice 5 mass. Okay, so this is the experiment. Then, based on our DNB theory, we found out at 8 hours, found a very significant signal. So we consider at 8 hours is a pre-disease state. This is the whole gene expressions. It's the half hour. This is the 1 hour, 4 hour, 8 hour, then 72 hour. So based on the DNB theory, we identify this group. We intentionally put here. So at half hour, there is no signal. No significant signal. Then this is the one for at 8 hours you have found a very significant signal. So we consider it's a pre-disease state. But at this state, at the clinical, diagnosis for the tissue is still lung is still normal. So it's not recognized as the injury. But the next stage, at the 12 hours, they found that the lung was injured. So we consider we correctly identified this pre-disease state. The interesting is with the further progress of the disease, like the 22 hours, you will find most of the DNB genes actually is not working at the disease state. They just push the disease from, the biological system from normal to the disease. Then at the disease state, it's not working. It's almost returned to the original expressions. This second example is a human. This is for the liver cancer. For the human, it's very difficult to make experiment, right? So we use the hold the liver cancer the tissues. So clinically, the liver cancer they can divide it into 6 stages. This is a very early stage. This is a very late advanced stage. Okay. 10 minutes. Okay. So. At each stage, we should. Actually, we should collect the same people, but it's impossible. So we collect, each stage about 10 people. So we consider these people measured 10 times. Okay. So it's an assumption. Okay. So we use the same theory. We identify this the DNB. Then we found out at the 3rd stage, they found a very significant signal. Okay, so we checked the next stage. What happened for the next stage? We found that most of patients in this stage they have the metastasis. So, which means even liver cancer is slowly changed. At a certain point, they have a very big, state transition. Maybe it's metastasis. Okay, so this is only assumption. Then we take the whole list DNB, for the liver cancer. We found out that interestingly, all these DNB genes, 9 of them are very popular. It's a well-known cancer genes. 5 of them are actually liver cancer genes, disease genes. So it's really related to the liver cancer. So this one, I will show the 2 examples. This one is for the influenza. This is an experiment conducted by the other group. We just use their data to make the prediction. This is 17 people. Okay, so they are infected with the virus. Is H3N2 Wisconsin virus at the same time. So then every 5 or 6 hours, they take the blood, then make the, say, microarray data. So for these 8 people, for instance, like these 4 people, S1, S5, F6, X7, at 40 5 hours, they found a symptom. I mean, clinically, by a medical doctor, identifies is a influenza right now. So these people is, at the 101 hour, they have the influenza, diagnosed influenza. All these 8 people, actually, they have no symptom, even they infected with the virus. So this is the age, this is the male, female. Okay, so this is the 17 people. So we used our theory. I mean, it's a big data. So we checked out. For the first eight people, we found out at 29 hours, we found a very significant signal. We diagnosed as a pre-disease state. Okay, for the remaining one, there is no signals. So this is our diagnosis. So we found out actually they came to the critical stage at around 29 hours. Okay. So it's a little bit early than the medical doctor. Here we only make the prediction. We don't use the remaining data. I mean, for this each time point. This is for diabetes. I think maybe we don't have too much time, so maybe I pass this one. Maybe I show the last example is cervical carcinogenesis. Is our cancer. So this one is we use this cancer. I mean, collect the sample from normal. This is we consider very dangerous part. It's still normal. It's a critical stage. So this is the cancer. Then we identify I think this is the methylation data, or DNA methylation data. We found out a very significant signal, and I think it's 91 CGP methylations. And then we use at the CIN2 plus positive, you found very significant signal. We believe this is the critical stage. Then we use this DMB to test another independent data. For this one, they have 5. I think it's 5 stage with the cancer stage. Then we found out still at this stage is very significant signal. Okay. Then we found this DMB group. They have very strong at this stage, very strong correlation. Okay, and also very strong the variations for this stage, for this 91 methylations. Okay, so this work, as mentioned, we use the dynamic theory. We consider small noise, then which resulted into the statistical result. So it's mainly for the high-dimensional network. So it's kind of a model-free model. So we don't use any parameter in this model. So it's okay. So we use, as mentioned, because this is for the clinical, we want to use the clinical application. We use the small number. We require small numbers. Certainly, if you have large samples, small samples, large sample is better. Okay. So that network is DMB is we believe is strongly related to the drivers. Also, theoretically, it can be used other biological phenomena, any such kind of nonlinear phenomena. They may be work, but we have not yet done such work. Future work is we don't have to show this work. We already finished this work, so we can show if you use the high-dimensional data, even one sample, you can identify the DMB. Another part is a big noise. If you consider the bifurcation, you have to consider the small noise. Because it's basically a deterministic system. But if you consider the big noise, actually, the critical transition is far from the bifurcating point. You will never see such a phenomena. So you have to use the different theoretical work. So this part maybe next time I will show you. This is, we used single samples published last year, how to identify the DNB. Okay. Okay. Maybe, this part, maybe, I pass this one. Tomorrow, Dr. Li would maybe talk about this kind of work. So maybe I pass this one. Awareness. So this year, we are going to host the ICSP. Welcome to Shanghai. Thank you very much.
So could you comment on the whether DNBs are really kind of deterministic, or they might be more statistical, meaning that every patient would have the same DNB, or it might be just like a giant fluctuation that is different from patient to patient?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Actually, DNB is personally dependent. Different person, they have a different DNB, even they have resulted into the same diseases. Mm-hmm. So we can show, for the influenza case, actually, whole 17 people, they have a different DNB. It's really, that is really human nature. It's a very high heterogeneity for each people. But for this case, we found out that even these 17 people, they have a different DNB, but they have a large part overlapped with each other for genes. But for the cancer, we are not sure. Maybe it's more diverse. Also, DNB basically is based on the small noise. We consider as a deterministic system, dominant hold the dynamics. Okay.
Thank you.